For the first time, the Islamic State is claiming responsibility for an attack in the United States. In radio and internet messages, the Islamic State says that the two gunmen from Phoenix who opened fire outside of a Muhammad drawing contest in Garland, Texas, were, quote, soldiers of the caliphate. And now, breaking news tonight reported by the New York Times. According to the New York Times, one of the gunmen, Elton Simpson's Twitter contacts included a British fighter with the Islamic State in Syria and an American now in Somalia who regularly promotes the Islamic State. Both men regularly called for violence, and they suggested the Texas event as a possible target. U.S. officials say Elton Simpson expressed his support for the Islamic State on Twitter Sunday, just before the attack, tweeting, "May Allah accept us as mujahideen." According to NBC's Pete Williams, investigators say Simpson's social media postings did attract attention from the police and FBI last month, but they say he was never explicit about any attack plans and was not under constant surveillance. As for the other gunman, childhood friends said today that they noticed Nadir Sufi, who was born in the United States but spent time in Pakistan as a child, became more isolated in recent years in the United States. Joining us now, Congressman Adam Smith of Washington State, a member of the House Armed Services Committee, and Steve Clemons, Washington editor-at-large for The Atlantic Magazine and an MSNBC contributor. Congressman, has the Islamic State finally reached into the United States?
Well, it would certainly seem that way, and that's always been the great threat and the great fear. I mean, back after 9/11, we identified al-Qaeda senior leadership, and there was a relatively finite group of people who were plotting and planning attacks against Western interests, and we could identify that network and go after it. What's happened since then is the movement has metastasized, and it is much more the lone wolf attacks, individuals, just following them on social media and then acting out. That is a much tougher thing to contain. That's a larger group of people to keep your arms around, and I think it's definitely a threat to the U.S.
Steve Clemons, a lot of debate today. Is the Islamic State really claiming credit for this? Do they really get credit for it? If they're encouraging people through Twitter or other means to do this, even people who they don't necessarily have, specific contacts with, it seems to me they get the credit.
Look, I agree with you. ISIS is in a competitive global branding campaign with other terrorist groups in the world, trying to get people to mimic what it does, to pay homage to what it does, and to inspire people to take actions that it instructs them to do from afar. So in that sense, they get credit, but it is not the same level as a deployment of someone who was well crafted and sculpted and trained by ISIS on site and then injected into American society to do terrific demand. I agree with Adam that it's something we should worry about. It's hard to sort of spot these lone wolf or even couple wolves attacks of this sort. But at the same time, it doesn't have the sophistication and impact of what Al-Qaeda has been, their signature events. So, to a certain degree, there are levels of concern here. But absolutely, ISIS gets credit for this because it's in a global branding campaign and it's inspiring people to take these actions.
And on April 23rd, the New York Times is reporting, this is 10 days before the Texas attack, that one of the encouragers posted a message saying, "The brothers from the Charlie Hebdo attack did their part. It's time for brothers in the U.S. to do their part," and Congressman Smith specifically referencing the contest there to draw Muhammad in Texas.
Well, and it speaks to the larger issue of the ideological struggle. This is not just a fight against ISIS or Al-Qaeda or Al-Nusra or Boko Haram. I mean, this is something where we really need to build relationships in the Muslim community and with moderate Muslim groups to stop this ideology. Because it's one thing to try to stop an organized group that's, plotting a specific attack and then sending somebody over. It's another thing to try to spot, just some, lone person who's suddenly going to go radical. That ideology, it's going to take a much more comprehensive approach to defeat that ideology, and I think working with the Muslim community is critical to that, both in the U.S. and throughout the world.
And Steve Clemons, the good news, bad news of this Texas episode is that the Muslim population around the area where this was taking place. They were all knew about it. They were very well informed about it, and their leaders said, you know, just take it easy. You know, this has nothing to do with us. Let's just ignore it. And they did. And they did. It took these guys coming over from Arizona. That's the bad news, is that the local population's reaction to this is now not all that important when they can just come over from Arizona.
Absolutely, and hats off to that community and to the mayor of that community who came out immediately and said, they don't have a majority ethnic group in that community, not white, not anything else. They've got 114 languages. They basically said, we are a tolerant community in Texas that embraces all these cultures. They didn't necessarily support what Pamela Geller's group was doing, but they certainly didn't support either the horrible actions taken by these two men, or attempted actions by these two men. And so you've got an interesting episode where out of this, if you look at that community, there's a resilience that's extremely impressive, and a mayor who stood up for the right things, in my view, which is to be tolerant, understanding, to try to understand these things far beyond just the Muslim community, but just the whole rainbow of different ethnic groups in Garland.
Steve Clemons, thanks for joining us tonight. And Congressman Smith, please stay with us. We're going to talk about Benghazi coming up. But up next,